Welcome back to Mystery and Murder Analysis by Dr. Phil. This is the podcast where we really peel back the layers on some of the most disturbing, headline-grabbing cases. We're not just looking at what happened, we're digging into why it happened, what drives someone to cross the line into darkness, sometimes so dark that it's downright evil. What kind of secrets can a person carry behind closed doors? And what happens when those sinister secrets finally spill out into behavior, finally spill out into evil actions that impact other people? And there's a difference. There's an evil spirit where people can just sit around and have these fantasies in their minds. And then there's those that go into action, where they put their hands on other people, where they impact other people. On our last episode, we began to unravel the chilling case of the Gilgo Beach Four, the name given to the first group of victims whose remains were found scattered along a remote, windswept stretch of sand on Long Island. What started as a missing persons report for an escort named Shannon Gilbert quickly spiraled into a full-blown serial murder investigation after the multiple bodies were discovered near Ocean Park. And then, nothing. Between 2011 and 2021, for more than a decade, the Gilgo Beach case went cold, ice cold. Leads dried up, momentum stalled, and as we discussed previously, Suffolk County law enforcement were embroiled in scandal. As the years dragged on, families of the victims were left in the dark, just searching for answers that never came. Now, can you imagine that you've had a loved one that has been brutally murdered, then discovered, and then there's so much turmoil inside the police department that you can't even get anybody to focus? So how did this long cold case finally crack open again? Just when justice for these victims seemed all but forgotten, a brand new task force stepped in. They didn't come to mess around. They brought fresh eyes, sharper tools, and a whole new mindset. They were on the cusp of a major breakthrough. Clues that had been hiding in plain sight were finally starting to line up, and a reckoning was coming. An arrest was about to be made, and the man at the center of it all had allegedly been living a double life right out in the open. Between 2022 and 2023, the pieces finally started to fall into place. And they all pointed to one suspect, a Long Island native by the name of Rex Heuermann. Here's what law enforcement uncovered that ultimately brought him into the crosshairs. The evidence was really clear, and when you look back on it, it's like, wow, how could this be missed? We'll start with burner phones. If you recall, the suspect in the Gilgo Beach serial killings was believed to have made taunting, disturbing phone calls to the families of at least two of the initial four victims, Melissa Barthelemy and Amber Costello. These past malicious antics were about to catch up with the mystery dialer. During the time these women vanished, they had all been in contact with a client using burner phones. Those so-called untraceable devices. Now, it doesn't take a genius to understand why someone hiring a sex worker might communicate with a burner phone. It's all about staying off the radar and avoiding any trace that could lead back to them. It also stands to reason that one also might want to use a burner phone if one intends to murder said sex worker. But here's the thing. Whoever was using those phones to schedule illicit rendezvous and send threatening messages wasn't nearly as anonymous as they thought. they left behind a digital trail. Investigators observed that those burner phones kept ringing off the same cell towers as Heuermann's personal cell phone, right near his home in Massapequa Park and his office in Midtown Manhattan. That meant he was likely carrying both phones at the same time. Not very smart. Then in May of 2023, he was caught on surveillance buying more minutes for a burner at a cell phone store in Manhattan. So this wasn't just a coincidence, it was a pattern. Now let's talk about the car and Amber Costello's roommate. And that wasn't all. Heuermann's green Chevy Avalanche was a pivotal clue in Amber Costello's case. She's another one of the original Gilgo Four. Back on the night Amber vanished in September of 2010, a client came to her home for her services. Her roommate, Dave Schaller, encountered him, and you need to hear how he described this fellow. Dave said this ominous visitor looked like a big, thick, hulking guy, standing around 6'4" with what he called an ogre-like presence. He even went so far as to compare him to Frankenstein, noting that the man had an awkward, unsettling demeanor and what he called an empty gaze. Dave said Amber was afraid for her life. He said when he came home, he found Amber locked in her bathroom after the man allegedly threatened her. Then Dave claimed that he and another friend intervened, at one point nearly letting their pit bull loose to drive the man away. Later that same night, the man called back undeterred and offered a significantly higher payment for Amber and her services. Sadly, she agreed and went outside to meet him, leaving without her purse or cell phone. That was the last time she was seen alive. Now, let's take a look at this dynamic here. You're probably looking at this and saying, how in the world would she reason her way from being locked in a bathroom with two roommates threatening to turn a pit bull loose on a guy to get rid of him, to saying, yeah, sure, I'll meet you. Coming up, the number one tool of the abuser is isolation. He would do anything to isolate his target, to get her alone so he could do what he wanted to do. I used to sleep terribly, but I found Beam's Dream Powder, a science-backed, healthy nighttime blend packed with ingredients shown to improve sleep. Beam is founded in America and run by people who share our values of hard work. Their Dream Powder is made with a powerful blend of all-natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. Here's the deal. Beam is giving my listeners the ultimate Patriot discount of up to 40% off. Try their best sleeping dream powder and get up to 40% off for a limited time. Go to shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil for up to 40% off. Sleep better, wake up stronger, and show up ready for your family, your work, and your country. Because when you're well rested, you're unstoppable. And this country needs more people like that. You're probably looking at this and saying, how in the world would she reason her way from being locked in a bathroom with two roommates threatening to turn a pit bull loose on a guy to get rid of him, to saying, yeah, sure, I'll meet you. And I'll go without a phone. I'll go without any way to call and get help. Well, you can't be inside her head for sure, but we have to know that she clearly had red flags that she chose to ignore. Look, our gut instinct, our intuition, our internal dialogue, whatever you want to call it, often responds to subtle clues. In this case, they weren't even subtle. Oftentimes we pick up on body language or tone of voice or how somebody's looking at you. These can all alert and signal danger. Here it was overt. She locked herself in another room to get away from this guy and had two people there supporting that decision. We've talked about security and violence prediction. There are people that specialize in this, and there's someone I know, Gavin DeBecker. He refers to this as the gift of fear. Now, why is it a gift? Because if we accept those signals, it can save our lives. Clearly, Amber felt unsafe with this man. Her gut told her, get away from him, and she did. But then Heuermann allegedly used manipulation to get his way. He raised his monetary offer. He used cash as a weapon. Now, sex workers typically don't do this as a first choice. They do it out of desperation. They do it because they feel like it's their last choice, their last opportunity. They have to do it because they have to have money. So when somebody recognizes that they're desperate, they need the money, they just up the ante to the point that somebody says, you know, they're going to pay double, triple, quadruple, whatever. They get to talking to themselves and say, I can't afford to not do this. So they'll ignore that voice saying danger, 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 because they'll kick themselves if they say no and miss that money that they need so desperately. It's a conflict. And clearly, he used that because he knew she was desperate. He knew she was vulnerable. Look, you have to understand, he wasn't paying for the service. He knew what he was going to do. He could have offered her 10 times what she was normally charging because he had no intention of paying it anyway. Because he wasn't there for the service, he was there to kill her. The number one tool of the abuser is isolation. He would do anything to isolate his target, to get her alone so he could do what he wanted to do. He didn't want to go find some other victim. He was locked in on this victim. And that wasn't his style to just go impulse kill. He targeted someone. He was allegedly hiring these escorts on purpose to fulfill his sadistic need. And this further supports the theory that he allegedly knew he was going to strike in advance. He took pleasure not just in the kill, but in the process. It was like a game for him. Serial predators set out to accomplish their goals. They do not like to fail or get derailed in the process. So he was gaming this situation, and by getting Amber to meet him, you can infer that Heuermann considered that a win. Dave gave police a detailed description of the encounter shortly after Amber's disappearance in 2010. He even identified the exact make and model of the truck from a photo lineup. But despite the strength of his account, that crucial information was ultimately ignored at the time. Think about that. You've got someone that has seen and interacted with the killer that she went off with, the man that she went off with, and never returned from, including an accurate description of the vehicle identified in an auto lineup, and it is ignored. But fast forward to 2022, and law enforcement traced the distinctive vehicle back to Heuermann through DMV records. Hot on his trail, the most damning piece of evidence came from a seemingly ordinary pizza box that a surveillance team watched Heuermann casually toss into a Manhattan trash can. Unaware, he had just handed investigators precisely what they needed. Inside that box, a leftover crust held a lot more than crumbs, because it contained his DNA. Forensic experts at the Suffolk County Crime Lab swabbed it and then waited. Just months later, detectives submitted a preserved male hair that had been found on another victim, Megan Waterman. By June of 2023, scientific results delivered the news. The mitochondrial DNA from that hair matched the DNA from Heuermann's discarded pizza. How certain? 99.96%. The odds were impossible to ignore. The clock had run out on Rex Heuermann. On July 13, 2023, Heuermann was arrested in Midtown Manhattan in dramatic fashion by plainclothes officers as he left his office building for the evening. He was then formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder in connection with the killing of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. Nearly a year later, prosecutors added a 4th murder charge for the death of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, solidifying their belief that Heuermann is responsible for the deaths of the Gilgo Beach 4. For more than a decade, law enforcement contended that this suspect had quietly preyed on women on Long Island, claiming multiple female victims. But who was this guy? I mean, really, exactly who was this guy? Well, at the time of his arrest, he was 59 years old. Now remember, this is long after the Gilgo 4 were killed, but at the time of his arrest, he was 59 years old. He was 6'4". And this lines up exactly with Amber's roommate Dave's recollection of him. Now, imagine such a towering oaf-like man while the Gilgo Beach 4 victims were all very petite. He could easily overpower these women physically. Most likely, this made him feel all the more powerful. Look, it's a classic cowardly move, going after someone smaller than you so you can feel dominant, so you can feel powerful, so you can lord over them. Because in every situation of rape, I can tell you there is a power motive that supersedes even the sexual aspect of the rape. And here, where we have all of this rape and murder and dominance and torture, he was not choosing these people by just throwing a dart. He was picking his victims where he felt powerful. Coming up, Heuermann allegedly lived the life of a man split in two. On one side, a father and an architect. On the other, an alleged violent sexual deviant. This message is sponsored by Greenlight. Remember summertime as a kid? The freedom, the boredom, the first taste of independence? Like setting up a lemonade stand or earning your first dollar. Summer's the perfect time to teach kids real-world money skills that they'll use for life. Greenlight is a debit card and money app for families. Parents can send money, manage chores, and track spending. Kids learn to save, invest, and spend wisely, all in a fun, game-like experience. My producer, LaFern, and her son, David, use it and love it. I wish I had Greenlight when my kids got their first allowance. It would have made life so much easier. Greenlight is the easy way to raise financially smart kids. Don't wait to teach your kids real-world money skills. Start your risk-free trial today at greenlight.com/Phil. That's greenlight.com/Phil. Greenlight.com/Phil. He was born and raised in Massapequa Park on Long Island, New York. He lived in the same house he grew up in. He graduated from Berner High School in 1981. He earned a bachelor's degree from the New York Institute of Technology, and he worked as an architect. He founded RH Consultants and Associates in 1994, and he specialized in navigating New York City's building codes. He worked with companies such as Target, American Airlines, Foot Locker. So when I say he had a dual life, he had a real life, aside from being a cowardly serial killer. He was married to Asa Eller for 27 years. They have 2 adult children. Now, Heuermann allegedly lived the life of a man split in two. On one side, a father and an architect. On the other, an alleged violent sexual deviant. If you start breaking him down psychologically, as I say, when you look at the victims that he chose, there's clearly a need for dominance and control. And others have spoken about this. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Carol Lieberman suggests that his alleged crimes reflect a compulsive need to dominate and dehumanize, using sex and violence to assert power, particularly over vulnerable women, and the victims certainly show that. Criminologist Scott Bond, who developed a closely matched profile of Heuermann prior to his arrest, points out that serial killers often follow media coverage of their crimes obsessively. Heuermann allegedly saved news clippings and searched his own name, suggesting narcissism and a craving for notoriety. What does that mean? Does it mean he sits back and looks at the coverage and takes what we call a duping delight, that he's sitting there hiding in plain sight, walking past police officers every day in Midtown Manhattan, a serial killer taking women's lives, raping, torturing, standing right next to a cop at a traffic light? That's exactly right. Narcissists think they're special. They think there's only one point of view and it's theirs. So he got off on that kind of thing. He had a craving for notoriety in a vicarious sort of way. He didn't want to be found, but he loved being speculated about, being written about, talked about. He clearly demonstrated traits of premeditation and ritual, using burner phones, aliases, studying his victim patterns. That's why I say he didn't choose these people at random. He picked them out, targeted them. That's why he came back after they'd threatened to sick the dogs on him. He obviously had deviant sexual interest. His online search history suggests he harbored sadistic sexual fixations, often tied to serial homicide patterns involving fantasy reinforcement. We see that a lot with these people. So boil it all down, this was a sick and twisted individual. And he got off on wielding power over weaker, smaller, vulnerable, and desperate women. He couldn't deal with somebody that would be seen by him as an equal, not in physical stature or someone that he thought was an intellectual equal that he would have to spar with. It wasn't somebody that he would go have an affair with or date or whatever and have to contend with. He had to find somebody that he felt superior to, that he could dominate. In July of 23, just days after his arrest, investigators descended upon his Massapequa Park home. What they uncovered would just send chills down the spine of even the most seasoned detectives. For 2 straight weeks, they scoured every inch of his residence, his storage units, his vehicles, digging for anything that would tie him to the Gilgo Beach murders. And they weren't just looking for DNA, they had that. They were hunting for something far more sinister. Trophies, tokens, the twisted remnants of a double life. And let me tell you, what they found well, it paints a disturbing picture. They seized a staggering trove of digital devices, 15 cameras, 27 computers, 46 cell phones, 42 USB drives, and 8 laptops. And buried within them, multiple decades worth of violent bondage-themed pornography. Some of it dating all the way back to 1994. And this wasn't just casual interest. It seemed like an obsession. But it did not stop there. Hidden among the clutter of what was described as a ramshackled house, investigators also uncovered handwritten documents, lists of supplies, coordinates of possible dumping sites, and chilling notes labeled, "Dispose of the following." These weren't the ramblings of a disturbed man. They were plans, blueprints, if you will. And then, perhaps the most unsettling find of all, there was a child-sized doll with blonde braids and a matching crimson dress and hair bow, which Heuermann allegedly kept posed upright in a wooden and glass case like some kind of twisted trophy. Experts have speculated it may have, or worse, perhaps, served as a stand-in. Dr. Catherine Kuhlman suggested that items like the doll may have been used to trigger memories of the alleged crimes and stoke Heuermann's fantasies. She explained that serial killers often hold on to souvenirs as a way to relive their acts, and in this case, the doll could symbolize youth or act as a stand-in for victims during periods between offenses. And remember, there were times that we at least don't have evidence of offenses. So this could have been a surrogate. However, as of now, law enforcement has not officially commented on the purpose of the doll. Images circulated showing law enforcement officers in protective suits removing the doll from Heuermann's home, and the photos are nothing short of haunting. In the photos, it looks like the men are carrying a miniature coffin, adding an eerie visual to an already sickening investigation. So, what do we glean from this evidence at Heuermann's home? Coming up, what we're looking at here is a man who didn't just hide in plain sight, he thrived in it. And that facade, it was cracking long before handcuffs were clicked onto his wrists. I've seen it all, from folks stuck in toxic relationships to people whose houses look like a tornado went through a craft store. But there's one problem I see plaguing America, and it ain't on the couch. It is the couch. Hideline offers customizable leather options so you can pick the color that fits your style. They've got specialized hybrid foam and pocketed coil cushion systems to help you sit comfortably for hours. For a limited time, you can get 10% off store-wide and free shipping with code Dr. Phil 10 at hideline.com. Clearly, this was evidence that this is not an impulse killer. He steeped himself in this through fantasy and this secret lair where he could possibly stash trophies and evidence, plan his crimes, and indulge in his fantasies. So when we say he had a secret life, it wasn't like the only time he engaged was when he was striking. He immersed himself in the thought process, the world of planning and fantasizing about this between the actual killings. Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, for example, served as a twisted sanctuary for his evil deeds. He got away with storing body parts for years. And then this obsession with violent pornography can really reflect a deep desire to control and harm others in intimate context, because you watch and fantasize and live vicariously through the images that are being watched. This idea of desensitization to violence, repeated exposure to this type of content, can numb one's emotional response to it in the real world. You get adapted to it, desensitized, and then it requires him to go further and further when he actually gets into his crimes against these women. He clearly had a fascination with crime and criminal profiling. Investigators found that he studied criminal profiling materials, including works by FBI profiler John Douglas. Heuermann had a copy of his book, Mindhunter, inside the FBI's elite serial crime unit. So obviously, he was attempting to understand investigative techniques. Maybe this was to help him know what not to do, how to not make mistakes, how to not give himself away to evade detection, which he did for a very long time. There was also a collection of weapons in the basement. Investigators uncovered a walk-in vault stocked with more than 200 firearms, even though Heuermann was licensed for fewer than half. The scale of the arsenal, along with its organized storage, suggests that this was far more than just a hobby. It indicates an intense preoccupation with power, control, and perhaps preparedness for something far more sinister. What kind of fantasies was he entertaining thinking about all of this firepower? Again, it's difficult to link the facade Heuermann presented as a working family man with the monster he's now alleged to be upon his arrest. Those who knew him were stunned, but you often hear that. His family was said to be shocked, embarrassed, and disgusted when news of his arrest broke. According to Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison, they had no idea about the alleged double life he was living and were blindsided by the accusations. His wife filed for divorce soon after the arrest, but despite the split, she has visited him behind bars and publicly stated that she doesn't believe he's capable of the crime he's accused of, and plans to reserve judgment until all the evidence is laid out in court. In Massapequa Park, where Heuermann had lived for decades, most locals described him as quiet and unremarkable. Just another face in the neighborhood. Again, how many times have you heard that? I speculate clinically if that's sometimes the reason that these people do what they do. It's like nobody sees me, nobody notices me, but I'm gonna be noticed. When you do look back, though, there are oftentimes red flags. His one longtime neighbor said his wife had called Heuermann creepy after she believed she caught him spying on her as she was sunbathing. And while former colleagues shared disbelief that he could be capable of such horrid crimes, some did recall his obsessive tendencies and really social awkwardness. One former coworker remarked he always acted like he was the smartest person in the room, and he made sure you knew it. Another recalled, he had this way of correcting you that felt more like a put-down than helpful advice. This would reflect his narcissism. Back in 2022, Heuermann actually did a sit-down on-camera interview with Antoine Amira, who ran a YouTube channel called Bonjour Realty. During that now deleted interview, Heuermann came across as something of a braggart. He painted himself as a seasoned expert, calling himself an architectural consultant and a troubleshooter. He talked about navigating New York City's red tape like it was second nature, even bragging about his personal library of old building codes. At one point, when he was asked what kind of tool he would be, he didn't say a pencil or some kind of drafting tool, something an architect might use. No. Instead, Heuermann responded that he would be a cabinet maker's hammer. Then he added, "It's persuasive enough when I need to persuade something." Now, you tell me, doesn't hearing that, knowing what we now allegedly know about him, send a chill down your spine? Even the interviewer walked away feeling slightly rattled. He later said, "He gripped my hand and it hurt." He described the conversation as hard to control, saying Heuermann seemed to thrive on making a mockery of authority, of the city, the government, anybody in charge. He sensed something strange in the way he interacted with his daughter, who was present during the interview. Amira noticed immediately that she was uncomfortable, that the daughter was intimidated by him, and that he felt deeply uncomfortable just witnessing it. You know, what we're looking at here is a man who didn't just hide in plain sight, he thrived in it. He flaunted it in a sense. And that facade, it was cracking long before handcuffs were clicked onto his wrist. When we talk about the mask of sanity, psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley coined this term back in 1941 to describe how psychopaths can appear charming, stable, socially functional, all while covering up or masking their lack of empathy and remorse. And this false illusion of normalcy allows them to hide in plain sight while committing heinous acts. Now, to do this, they've got to do what we call compartmentalization. This is a psychological defense tactic that we see in different killers. Dennis Rader, also known as BTK, short for bind, torture, kill, was a twisted name he gave himself. Rader led what seemed like an ordinary life. He was a trusted church council president, devoted husband and father, yet behind closed doors, he was orchestrating unspeakable crimes. You know, a lot of these killers report early experiences of childhood trauma, bullying, neglect, marginalization, where they've just kind of been pushed to the side, socially alienated. Sure enough, Heuermann reportedly was bullied in school and described as a loner by classmates. Conditions that can foster internal rage and a need to take back control and try to dominate others later in life. You know, narcissists have this need to control, this need to be the center of attention. And both Dennis Rader and Heuermann displayed a fixation on control. Rader taunted police and sought attention for his crimes. Heuermann not only allegedly reached out to the victim's family on a burner phone, he also kept organized records tied to the murders, suggesting he may have gotten satisfaction out of planning and then revisiting and documenting his crimes. To go back and relive them step by step. So the alleged Gilgo Beach killer was now behind bars. And while there were more victims found on that strip of beach, as we previously discussed, the reason Heuermann wasn't charged with more murders at the outset was simple. Investigators only had strong forensic and circumstantial evidence tying him directly to those 4 cases at the time. But this is not the end of the story, not by a long shot. On our final episode on this chilling case, we'll uncover the following. Where is Rex Heuermann today? And what's the status of the investigation and his looming trial? Did Shannon Gilbert's mother, Mary, ever find her daughter? The missing young woman who started this entire investigation, and in a shocking twist, could yet another victim now be linked to this alleged serial killer? The answers are coming, and they may be more disturbing than you think. I want to invite you to follow and subscribe to Mystery and Murder Analysis by Dr. Phil. It's available on all podcast players and YouTube, because we're going to be talking about some things that I don't think you're going to find anywhere else. Certainly not at the level and depth that we're going to dig in. Don't think it odd if you listen to these episodes more than once, because we're unpacking an awful lot here. Be sure to subscribe and follow. I'll see you next time.
When retired NFL quarterback Eric Kramer checks himself into a motel room, puts a gun to his head, and pulls the trigger, he thinks all his problems will be over. But when Eric survives, he's got the brain capacity of a 6-year-old, and a tall, blonde con woman swoops in, secretly marries him, and starts bleeding him dry.
The secret marriage was a way to keep her taking his money.
And the law is on her side.
They're married. What's his is hers, what's hers is his.
Listen to The Quarterback and the Con Artist, wherever you get your podcasts.